This week, it was finally made official, even though the implication was pretty strong when I spoke to you guys last week. But for presumably the last time in a couple of weeks, we will get the latest iteration of John Cena versus Randy Orton. Now, we have got this match on pay per view so many times. We've got on TV a whole lot of times too, and there's been many multi person matches. Orton and Cena are like peanut butter and jelly. You just want to say one without the other. They are essentially, I wouldn't say they are the two top guys from their era because there's other top guys that they kind of share the stage with. Cena is the top guy of his era, but I don't know if I would necessarily put Orton above a Batista or even above a Triple H in that era, even though we associate Triple H with a different era. My main point being is that when you think of like John Cena rivals, you think Cena Orton, Cena Edge, Cena Punk. Those are basically it. And there's a few others in there. But as Azan is very astutely pointing out in the chat, this time it's different. The dynamic has never, ever been like this. We have never had heel John Cena. That's almost a full stop statement versus Randy Orton. And a very, very facey Randy Orton. The most cheered Randy Orton probably of his entire career. And all that happens in a couple of weeks in Orton's hometown in St. Louis. Now, when you knew that Cena was scheduled for a retirement tour and you knew he was scheduled for this show and Orton was scheduled for this show pretty early on, I think that everyone kind of just assumed that this was going to be the match. And it was a pretty safe assumption. And so, I don't think people have been that dismissive of this matchup. But that's interesting because it's interesting to me, at least, because I remember a time not that long ago. Actually, it was a long time ago. It's like 10 years ago. So actually, this shows you how long this has been going on. When people swear to God, they never, ever, 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 ever wanted to see another Cena versus Orton match ever again. Because we had seen it a whole lot of times. And some of the consensus on it, honestly, was that it was worn out. And my take has always been that they don't actually have great chemistry together. And just because they're the two top guys of an era doesn't mean they are each other's actual greatest rival. They just had a whole lot of matches against each other. Again, I would put the likes of Edge and CM Punk way higher in terms of scale of rivalry to John Cena. At the same time, I think in WWE canon, Cena and Orton are the absolute rivals of each other. And we're going back to this with this different dynamic. So what I did over the last week is I decided to take myself on a little bit of a deep dive. See, let me let you guys in on a little bit of a secret that we don't always tell you. When you are a wrestling podcaster, you have what we call no social life at all. There's something about being a wrestling podcaster that people don't want to hang out with you. You don't get to go on very many dates. You don't get invited to very cool things. I don't know what it is about being a wrestling podcaster that just seems to engender that with other people. With that said, got a lot of time in my hands. So I was like, you know what? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sit there and I'm going to watch every single one-on-one Orton versus Cena pay-per-view match. And I want to make an assessment on each one and actually do a little bit of an evaluation at the end and figure out what's the deal with this rivalry. Has it always been bad? Was it ever good? Is it not as bad as we think it is? Or is it much worse now that we watch it out of context years later? So what we're going to do today, right up around to Dynamite starts, but we always reserve the right to bleed in to Dynamite, is I want to take you on a little journey through the one-on-one pay-per-view history of Orton versus Cena. We'll talk about the matches, how they went, what the implication, what the storyline was, and ultimately come to some conclusions here. Now, I will say, before I completely get into this, I did discount many Cena Orton pay-per-view matches because simply they were multi-person matches. Now, I do have a certain takeaway from watching some of those matches, because I did watch many of those matches over the weekend as well. When it came to multi-person matches, John Cena and Randy Orton were absolutely entertaining. They have so many matches that are just Orton, Cena, and Triple H, and they're probably like the best Triple H matches he had any of those years. There's plenty of ladder matches. There's plenty of elimination chamber matches. Orton and Cena really tore it up in multi-person matches. But that's not what I care about today. What I care about today is Orton and Cena on pay-per-view. Now, before I pull up the graphic, I got to take a sip of water. And while I'm taking that sip of water, I want to ask you guys, and I want you guys to throw that in the chat. Does anyone know what the first ever Orton versus Cena pay-per-view match was? Do you guys know the year and the event? Go ahead and throw that in the chat. It is in 2007. And you're on the right track, except for that match was announced, Azan, and it never happened. No. What I am referring to, the first ever matchup between these two in a one-on-one environment on a pay-per-view was SummerSlam 2007. Summer of 2007 in wrestling. Anyone remember what was happening in that time period? That's something we can throw in the chat. It's not something I want to say out loud that much because I really don't want to get demonetized now with the new partnership. But no. SummerSlam 07. So we are right in the thick of things in August of 07. If you recall, in June of 07, something very, very dark happened. Chris, not just that, Azan. Not just that. So you did have the on-screen assassination of Vince McMahon. That happened. The guy blew up, and then he was looking for his illegitimate son that turned out to be Hornswoggle, but not really, because he was kind of Finley's illegitimate son, and I don't know, there was a lockbox, and maybe that was a shoot. I don't know. What did happen in the summer of 07 was the Chris Benoit tragedy, which altered the Vince death storyline. It altered everything. There are people on these pay-per-views that are suspended in certain months, and some that were on the signature pharmacy list and all that good stuff, and never missed a pay-per-view. Kind of like some people I'm seeing on the screen right now. So WWE was in a bit of a weird spot where they're having to defend themselves on TV while also putting on these events, and there's a lot they can't talk about, and these shows are pretty awkward in that time period. With that said, 2007 is generally considered to be one of John Cena's best in-ring year. In fact, probably his best year as champ, as a main champion, and his best year overall until like 2015 or something like that. But here we were with the first ever meeting of Orton versus Cena at SummerSlam 07. And I remember this slightly going back into the memory bank. And I remember this match feeling like somewhat of a big deal because it did feel like for the first time we might be getting this generation's version of a Warrior Hogan or a Rock Austin, because you had like these two top guys that are in their true youth, and think about how young they are at the time, and they're meeting for the biggest title. No other help, no Triple H's, no triple threats, no multi-person stuff, no shenanigans. It is just these two in a match. And again, this is John Cena in 2007. Now, John Cena as a champion in 2007 has a bit of a weird profile, because 2006 was a hell of a year for John Cena. 2006 is the year when he gets booed at the Royal Rumble against Edge. He gets booed pretty heavily at WrestleMania against Triple H. He famously has so much heat at ECW One Night Stand and has that series with Edge. Now, Cena is hated through a lot of 2006. Something happened, though, at the beginning of 2007. He had his feud with Umaga. Now, we remember Umaga for a lot of things, but I think one of the things he's really underappreciated for is he did so much, I don't want to say maintenance to John Cena, but he did so much to kind of solidify John Cena as a champion with that one feud. I think that feud was the first time that you felt like John Cena was carrying someone else through what they were doing. And it really worked. They had great chemistry. They did a great job of building up Umaga in that time period as well, facing off at the Royal Rumbles. You also had the series of matches with Shawn Michaels to start the year. And while Cena got a lot of heat in those matches opposite Shawn Michaels, they were all generally really good matches, especially the one they had on Raw. Remember the like hour-long one that they had because Randy Orton trashed his hotel room or something like that? That match was much better than their WrestleMania match. And the WrestleMania match is probably the most underrated WrestleMania main event that there is, just because I think it is one of the more average Shawn Michaels matches. So we have in turn not put that up there as one of the great John Cena matches. Also, we just like to forget about a lot of the Cena stuff from this time. But going back here, 07, right here in this arena, John Cena is getting booed out of the building again for the most part here, facing Randy Orton. And this would become a theme throughout this entire feud. Now, you got to remember, at no point in this feud is Randy Orton a babyface. And John Cena in this feud is as babyface as he could possibly be. And as I mentioned, WWE was in the thick of the steroid scandal. Now, if you watch this match, the first half of this match exactly exemplifies why Cena and Orton can be a little groan inducing. The first half of the match is chin locks, headlocks, and stretch submissions, mostly offense by Randy Orton. And it is very slow and it is very methodical. And even though it is over, how long are we looking at now? We're almost on like 18 years since all of this went down. Even though it has been that long, even the audiences back then didn't quite have the attention span for a bunch of rest holds. Now, you look at some WWE main events today, and they could be slow and plotting affairs. However, the characters seem to be much more over in general, even at times when the product is kind of cold. So you do have a greater investment in the match outcomes than I think you did in this time period. If you watch this match, it was a lot of heat on Orton until Cena had his big fire up. It was a very basic formula. Now, if you also look at all these feuds, whenever John Cena was on offense, these matches felt fresh. The crowd, at least the higher pitch people in the crowd, were very into these matches. There's sort of a groan-inducing quality when Orton's on offense. Now, you might say he's a heel and that's how it's supposed to be, but he also doesn't feel very menacing in many of these things. He actually feels very cartoonish. With that said, this match ended up being very good once they got going, and it ended up being a clean win for John Cena. Not a big surprise. I almost feel bad saying that you completely understand some of the Cena hate, which I took part in, but like at the time wasn't being as analytical as I would be now, because Cena really was a very, very athletic Hogan in the way they were structuring some of these matches. He would just get beat for 75% of the match and then fire up. Again, not selling anything, not really telling much of a story to anything, just having the ultimate fury of offense and getting the win and seeming unstoppable. So the Hogan comparisons just make so much sense. And again, if you're some smart that might have grown up a little bit on Hogan, but you went through most of your prime during the Attitude Era and part of the New Generation Era, and you saw this wrestling that is much more subpar to the New Generation Era and this level of promo and stuff that's just not as good as the Attitude Era, you understand why there was such animosity towards John Cena. Animosity that he's still trying to use in this current heel run. So this started a series of matches. Now, I believe this series of matches was originally planned to be 3 matches, but it only ended up being 2. The next such match, or Cena retained, obviously, was a match at Unforgiven. Once again, Orton Cena rematch. However, this time, as you can see with the graphic, they did not main event. This was a main event of Mark Henry and The Undertaker, believe it or not. I don't know if they were trying to do some equal opportunity distribution between the shows. I have no idea why Mark Henry and The Undertaker main evented over Cena and Orton, but they did. It could happen, Pirate. It really could. But if you recall, this match had a little bit hotter of build than I think they did for SummerSlam. For one, this pay-per-view was the 1-year anniversary of John Cena's title reign. I talked to you about what he was up to in 2007 and this run. This run was a hell of a run. It's going to come to an end very soon, unfortunately. But he hits the year mark on this pay-per-view. As you recall, he got it the year prior from Edge. This was one of the angles where they first brought in John Cena's dad to feud specifically with Randy Orton. That was something I forgot going down this rabbit hole, and I really hope they bring it up in the new storyline. Randy Orton beat up Mr. Cena so many times in the course of their feud. Like, I honestly don't know why Cena kept bringing his dad around Orton. I know like Edge had some things with Cena's dad, but good God, Orton really did a number on Cena's dad. Cena's dad was ringside though. He was hanging out. He ain't no coward, Mr. Cena. And this was a weird vibe though. You come out there and the crowd was just angry at Cena. It was once again a pro Orton crowd. And again, this is the time when John Cena was getting these reactions fairly regularly, so this does not seem odd. And I would say that in this era of commentary, yeah, Jim Ross on commentary, but even some of the Michael Cole later on, they do a really good job, much better than they did in Roman Reigns' initial face run, of acknowledging the boos, acknowledging why those boos are there, talking about the dynamics of the characters, being able to sort of explain it away without acting like you were seeing something different or your mind was playing tricks on you. They did a much better job of this with John Cena than they ended up doing with Roman Reigns. Now, they did a much better job in the heel run with Roman Reigns, in my opinion, than they've done so far with Cena, but that's a different story for a different day. Once again, there's a lot of early slow spots, but when Cena gets in some offense, though those members of the crowd, whether it was the kids or there was the women, or they're just like normal people who like John Cena, they were much louder and much more enthusiastic whenever he would go on that offense. But I don't really even understand what the hell happened in this match, because like about a quarter of the way through it, as it was just kind of getting started, Cena got disqualified for like rage. I'm not even kidding that. Like Cena was punching and stomping Orton, which, yeah, I get it. The whole thing of closed fist, especially JR, he was probably so happy to see DQ because of a closed fist. But it really was a lame finish on a pay-per-view where John Cena basically became rage-filled after Randy Orton was taunting his father, gets in some stomps, and gets himself disqualified. That's a really lame finish on a pay-per-view. And remember, this is when pay-per-views actually costed money. People paid for this. What was it back then? Probably about $40. So are we still in the 30s era? 40, but you adjust it for inflation. And this is right at the end of the bubble too. Unforgiven 07. Someone went bankrupt because they ordered that pay-per-view, and like the financial crisis a few months later happened because of this show. I'm pretty sure about it. Orton goes after Papa Cena again after the match, and Cena beats the crap out of him. Cena's dad actually lands a punt on Orton, which was a good piece of entertainment there. And what's funny about this is the match was done. You felt robbed with the match, to be honest with you. The post-match angle with Mr. Cena getting involved and even Cena beating up Orton, the crowd was all into that, and that was an extremely hot angle that spilled out into the back with John Cena confronting Jonathan Coachman. Now, the Raw GM authority figure stuff has always been more confusing than the SmackDown stuff, because it was usually like Vicky or Teddy Long. Sometimes Vince was in charge. I don't know. Eric Bischoff. I don't know who's in charge. I guess Coach was around and Coach was in charge. And Coach is scolding Mr. Cena and scolding John and telling him that next month they're going to settle it all in a last man standing match at No Mercy, which you would figure was going to be the feud ender of this thing. As many of you may know, that never happened. John Cena ended up being injured, torn pectoral, and was going to be out of action for about a year. They wrote it off in storyline as Cena causing the injury, and we were going to be relieved of Cena for a couple of months. This resulted in some Triple H and Orton action, a lot of Shawn Michaels in Orton action. Eventually, Orton and Jeff Hardy did their thing. But you remember, this was when Super Cena really got his credibility as the guy who never misses time. Because it was only a couple of months later at the Royal Rumble where, believe it or not, John Cena was cheered in Madison Square Garden upon his return. Once they realized that the rules were they were supposed to hate him, they went back to booing him. But that was an insane return. And just nobody saw it coming. Nobody saw it coming. 08 was not was not exactly right now in terms of the openness of information, but it's still very much the modern internet era. And the fact that they kept that so tightly under wraps with such a big star to have such a big surprise, that was amazing. Now, John Cena, he's one of the dumbest Royal Rumble winners of all time. And I say that not because not having anything to do with his like IQ or anything, how he won the match. I'm saying that because think about the Rumbles that John Cena has won. The second time he won the Royal Rumble, he challenged The Rock to a rematch for the championship. That's how you do a Rumble. The first time he went to the Rumble in 2008, he cashed in his title shot, not at WrestleMania. He wanted to face Randy Orton at No Way Out, which, now that I'm even thinking about that, I don't have this in my notes. What the hell is up with John Cena doing weird stuff at No Way Out that alters WrestleMania to unreasonable proportions? There's also there's elimination chambers involved in that show. No Way Out 2008 is overall a really good show. Why we had the faux WrestleMania main event on that show, I pointed to my nose here, but I think we know why we got that. But nonetheless, No Way Out 2008, the faux WrestleMania main event between John Cena and Randy Orton. Now, I have watched this match several times over the years, mostly because I used to have a bootleg copy of No Way Out 2008, and for whatever reason, I would just watch it a lot because I just like moved and I didn't have anything else to watch. So I watched this match quite a bit. I don't ever remember this match being of that quality because I guess because I knew the finish, but watching it with a little bit fresher of a perspective, I realized that, oh my gosh, this was an amazing match right until the shenanigans started. They were the crowd was into it. John Cena got mostly a babyface reaction. There was mostly a heel reaction for Orton. But then the Orton heel trait, which he was on an amazing run of doing this. How many pay-per-views in late 07, early 2008 did Orton get himself intentionally disqualified? In this match, at one point, he runs out to get himself counted out, and that doesn't fly. And then eventually he gets the low blows and the slap, and he gets himself intentionally DQ'd. Have no idea what you're saying there, Johor, but what's up? And this left a really sour taste in that crowd's mouth, though. Again, for the second time on pay-per-view, you have a DQ finish in a title match with who are supposed to be your biggest stars. And again, they do not pay this off at WrestleMania in a one-on-one match or in a main event. So this is not the case of a keep watching. You kept watching, you ended up disappointed with this. With that said, again, you would never have known for this match that these two ever were going to be known as two guys with chemistry issues with each other. They looked amazing when they were facing. I will say, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything, so please do not sue me. But coming out of 2007 into 2008, if you compared the physiques, particularly of Randy Orton, but if you compare their physiques to how they looked in 2007, I guess they just weren't getting as good of nutrition. Maybe the Benoit stuff caused them to cut back on catering. I don't know why these guys were smaller. I really don't. You could figure that out for yourself, but I don't know why these guys were so much smaller in early 2008. Just a coincidence, I'm sure. As I mentioned, with this finish, they go on to have another match, but of course, the game is involved like he always is. And that match actually was really good. The triple threat at WrestleMania. The triple threat they would have at Night of Champions 2009, I thought was much better. And also their triple threat match that these three had at Survivor Series 2009, I want to say, or 2010, right in there. One of those years, that was also very good. This was probably the worst of those three matches, and it was still very good. I mean, the lights were out in the arena, but it was all good. But it was right in the middle, and you had a quick finish. And probably because Orton was moving on with the title is where it was placed on the card and how they were doing it. But we fast forward now. We'd get a little bit of a break from Cena versus Orton. 2008 is a really, really weird year for these two guys. You got to remember where we are in the overall timeline. 2000, what are we looking at? 2008 is 3 years after these guys have basically been coronated. A little bit longer for Orton because I don't know if you count SummerSlam 04 as his coronation. I really think his coronation is a combination of like Backlash 04 and the WrestleMania match with The Undertaker. But it might even be this era or it never really happened. Regardless, at this time period, despite all of the off the field issues that Randy Orton was having, you weren't quite sure what direction they were going to go in as their absolute top guy. That still felt like it was a little bit open, even though John Cena had clearly consumed the babyface side of it and had fully passed Dave Bautista by this point. And if you look at early 2008, I get the impression that they were maybe even thinking about going in a different direction from Cena altogether. Like they weren't, not that they were going to deep push Cena, but were they totally all in on Cena? Because he like doesn't win any pay-per-views for like the first 6 months of 2008. And he doesn't get pinned a lot. He's not exactly like this loser. He doesn't lose to Triple H probably for a receipt. I don't know. But he's in a bit of a funk for most of the early part of 2008, culminating in that pretty good feud he had with Batista. He had all this that we're talking about with Orton and Cena. I mean, we're already like 4 matches in on this live stream. He ended up facing Batista like for the first time in a one-on-one setting in summer of 2008. And so we have a really long break from the Orton Cena thing. Now in this time period, you saw a little bit of it in 2007, but by the time we get to 2009, we're full on with the evil Randy Orton character. I think it's most notably known for what he did in the build to WrestleMania that year. You have you have Triple H breaking into his house. You have him DDTing and kissing Stephanie. You have all 3 McMahons coming out like they're gonna fight Randy. You have Shane in a competitive match with Randy Orton before it was even like a cool thing for Shane to be competitive. I don't know why the guy got better when he was older. Don't really understand that either. But they built this super evil, unfathomable Orton character who had a normal technical match that he lost at WrestleMania, by the way, to somebody. I don't know. And this is really weird time for what we're going to talk about next, because what we have now is we're going to fast forward to SummerSlam 2009. This is a pretty infamous show, I think, for a couple of reasons. If you look at actually just what happened on this show in terms of the placement, like slightly before this, you had Legacy versus DX. Now, how funny is it to think of Legacy right now? Ted DiBiase and Cody Rhodes. Remember when Ted DiBiase was going to get the Undertaker match and Cody Rhodes was the Marty Jannetty of that group? Doesn't that seem like funny to think about now? But no. Here we have right in the middle of the card. Oh, and you know who made it? This is the thing. Do you know who main evented over John Cena? A little fellow by the name of CM Punk. Now, he did go opposite Jeff Hardy, who was about to end his contract, and The Undertaker had a run in to close the show. So, you know, it is what it is. But here we had Cena and Orton. And when I think of hating Cena versus Orton as a concept, I always think of SummerSlam 2009. Thought this was actually going to be a pretty darn good build the build was good, but then we got the match. And this match, as Azan saying, is complete BS. It's not a real match. But again, much like the match they had a year and a half earlier at No Way Out, when the two were actually wrestling before the shenanigans started, they had a pretty good chemistry with each other. They had the crowd fairly invested. But I would say this again, this era of main event style matches, they're not bad. They are just simply a little boring. And when you have a promotion that's not very over, that can really affect everything. And it's nothing but shenanigans. You have intentional countouts, you have intentional disqualifications, and eventually freaking Brett DiBiase gets involved. Like, we somehow found a lesser charismatic version of Ted DiBiase to get involved in this feud. And it was like kind of slick, you know, it was an extension of Legacy, this and that, but it felt like a ripoff of a main event. There's a few other times they've done this where they're starting and restarting. I know they did this fairly recently, within like the last 6 years or so, I want to say, with the main event. I just can't recall which one it is, and that also is an homage generally, I think, to SummerSlam 2006, with Vader versus HBK. All versions of the start-stop match really seemed to suck. And this was weird because it was just not a real match. This was simply an angle that they were building out that I don't think the SummerSlam crowd quite had the patience for. This is the early on when they were going to LA like every year for SummerSlam before they did the New York run. And now I don't know where they're going to be. Now they got multiple nights. The roster was so thin back in the late 2000s. There's no way they could have done multiple nights. They might not really have the booking capacity, I would say right now, to do multiple nights, but they get it done. So Punk shows up in OVW in late 05, Sean. He comes in on the Cena entrance at WrestleMania in 2006, and it's later that year with the relaunch of ECW that he officially comes on the main roster. So like mid 2006, I want to say summer of 2006 is right around when we get the straight edge superstar with that fire burning inside of him. Yeah, Punk is kind of a weird figure through all of this because he's always sort of around. Like I've always disagreed with Punk's notion that he was never cared for or like they completely discarded him. They just had him a little bit lower than everyone else on the card, but he was generally a focus. He almost never won his matches, but it is what it is. So, of course, when you get a finish like you're getting at SummerSlam 09, it basically serves what many of these matches seem to serve as commercials for their next match. Now, their next match was interesting. Does anyone remember Breaking Point as a pay-per-view concept? Again, one of the things that also hurt this feud was it existed in the era where the matches and the pay-per-views were gimmick match pay-per-views. So many of the matches on the pay-per-view had to be of this certain gimmick. And I believe the Breaking Point concept was supposed to be like a submission-themed pay-per-view. Now, even though John Cena has a submission move as one of his finishers, no one in their right mind would consider Orton and Cena as these submission specialists. But going all the way back to Bret Hart and Steve Austin, you do not need to necessarily be a submission specialist to have a great I Quit match. They tend to be brawls where you put a microphone in someone's face and they yell, I quit. In his prime, in his face run, it is the dumbest thing ever for a wrestler to engage in an I Quit match with someone whose gimmick is that they never give up. Obviously, that's what they were trying to go for from like a heat perspective, but it was kind of lame. I think you're right on both of those, E. That was a weird time. Then Lance Cade is also in that mix too that year. Oh, it's awful. It's awful. Actually, I would say this is one of the best STFs he ever did because he got the help of some handcuffs. Now, this match took on a weird sort of aspect that a lot of these matches had. So starting here, they were going even further with the devious Orton character, where he was obsessed with making John Cena submit. And he comes out there like he's in a trance because he's just so ready to torture John Cena. He's going to make him quit. And it became these weird, like, torture matches, like, you know, where he's just doing all this brutality on John Cena. The problem with that is that it's 2009. From a content perspective, WWE was never going to be more PG and never trying so hard to market towards the kids. So it was very hard to have these really, really weird stipulation, brutal matches against, you know, the backdrop of a super PG era. So it's a lot of Cena being tied up to a post and getting beaten with a stick, getting handcuffed to the thing, just getting beaten. And of course, Cena's never going to say, I quit. He doesn't do that, right? So it's slow, it's plotting. Eventually, Cena figures out the riddle and he gets Orton to tap with that chain. Now, I don't know if this seems significant to you or not, but this was a major title win for John Cena, who at the time only had like 4 or 5. So it's not like he had like 72 or 17 or whatever the hell he has now. It was much less. So it was a much more momentous occasion. Plus, it was finally someone knocking Orton off his perch. We forget that Orton wasn't the champion, I think, in early 2009, probably because like we don't want to remember that Triple H or whoever else had the title. I know Edge had it. They did a lot of hot potato around the Elimination Chamber as well. But regardless, it's basically Orton on top, even if he's not the guy with the title. So this did sort of break that Orton reign and showed some, beatability to Orton and where he was. But the problem was the match was just so dang lame and so dang slow. And this concept was odd. Also, the thing about I Quit matches is like they work when The Rock is kind of entertaining on the microphone and him and Mick Foley are doing their thing, but it's just a bunch of no. It's a bunch of grunting no. Or you have like Roddy Piper who doesn't really, or Bob Backlund who doesn't really know how to do the match where you're supposed to do. That's pretty fun too. Going forward, we have a really weird dynamic because, you have the long title run, you've had a title change, gotta have a rematch, right? So for the third pay-per-view in a row, and the first time ever that this was a concept on pay-per-view, Hell in a Cell. Orton versus Cena. Sounds better than it actually was. Now, once again, Cena and Orton were actually not main eventing. So maybe that should give you an indication as to what type of match this was going to be. They were just down from The Undertaker doing his thing, which again, Hell in a Cell, you understand The Undertaker. Actually, it wasn't The Undertaker. It was a different match. I might be having that wrong. I want to say The Undertaker and Punk opened this. I might be completely wrong. Anyway, here we go. Cena and Orton in Hell in a Cell in 2009, and it's more of the same. They're trading step shots. They're just trading these very slow and plodding shots. And it's at this point where we're at 3 pay-per-views in a row, and they have not had a single solid match between the two of them. And you're getting word out of it. And as I mentioned earlier, these characters, while being the top guys in the show, there's a lot of interesting stuff underneath. 2009 has a pretty good roster. I mean, like I said, yeah, they couldn't split into 2 nights, but you had amazing stuff going on with Jericho and Mysterio on the undercard. Jeff Hardy was about to reemerge and all this cool stuff. These new names. CM Punk is doing his thing. And instead, we got Orton and Cena for the 5th time, and it's just not very good. It doesn't work. And they trade moves, and you get an RKO and a punt spot and the victory by Orton. So they've traded back and forth. There they go, which means they can only culminate their 2009 in one way. But it's really weird though, going back to this match when I say that, because aren't Hell in a Cell supposed to be feud enders? And I think understandably so. We begrudge the stipulation era of the WWE pay-per-views because it was so dumb when two people's first match would get booked on the SmackDown before, and now they're going to be in a Hell in a Cell match. But in this case, it was the third match of a blood feud that had been going on for 3 years. You'd think that a Hell in a Cell could have been a feud ender. But no. Now, technically, you could say they raised the stakes in this next match, but I'm not sure. You guys recall everything going on in this photo? Bragging rights 2000. Remember when they were trying to slowly but subtly replace Survivor Series with this concept of bragging rights, which just looks like a SmackDown versus Raw video game cover, and that basically was the concept. I actually like it from an honesty perspective because when they do Survivor Series of these battles of brand supremacy, like it's a fight to the death, it's acting like there's some great stakes involved in it. And I don't have a big problem with these matches the way some other people in wrestling media do. I just don't like having these fake stakes attached to it. Which again, if you don't have wrestling without stakes, then why are you watching? I get that. But at least this one in its title just flat out said it. Bragging rights. This person gets to say our show is better. There's no nuance there. There doesn't need to be. What there was, amazingly, was an Iron Man match between Orton and Cena. That sounds like a freaking nightmare to begin with. But they made this a no DQ falls count anywhere Iron Man match, which, considering the competitors involved, you get the sentiment. And so here we were, 2 of the most plotting guys on the roster wrestling each other for an hour. Now, Iron Man matches are difficult. I think they're polarizing is the way to describe them. There have been some very good ones. I think the one on the television ones have actually been great. The one that Triple H and Benoit had on Raw was very good. The one that Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar had on SmackDown. It was probably the best one one of the best ones that they've ever done on WWE television. WrestleMania 12 is a polarizing match. If you ask Daniel Bryan, he'll say it's the greatest match ever. If you ask me, I'll say it's the most overrated match ever. It's kind of required viewing for a wrestling fan to have your opinion on it, but you get the idea of those two facing off for an hour. I don't know how The Rock and Triple H had a better Iron Man match than Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, but it is what it is. They had a great Iron Man match in 2000. Maybe because 2000 was pretty awesome, so everything that happened that year was pretty awesome. But here you go, booking Cena and Orton for an hour that also had 30-second intervals in between. This thing, you know, at Peacock, you get where the ad comes in. This thing was so long, it had like 2 ads in the middle of it. Like I almost thought it was a Chris Benoit match or something. Back in the day on the network with the chapter marks, you knew you had a Benoit match when you have a nice long thing there. All right. Let me get into some notes. I had to take like real notes, like I was doing this for a Raw review. Oh, another thing. Cena's Raw status was on the line. It wasn't a career-threatening match, just his Raw status. So much to the point that like Michael Cole messes it up, but when he's saying at the beginning, he was like, just remember, if John Cena loses, he will go to SmackDown. So it's like, just remember, if John Cena loses, you will have to watch him on a more accessible channel to you. Like there is no real stakes actually attached to this other than the title and them really framing this as the feud ender. Like there's no way you could probably have another match at the conclusion of an Iron Man match. I know like Rock and Triple H did have another interaction, but at least that was a 6-man match. This was something. Now, early on, Cena is bleeding, and this is a very strict era of no blood, and it appears to have been a bit of a hard way because you had a mic shot. Orton requested the mic. There's all these weapons around, and Orton wants a mic. It seemed to be very effective. He bumps Cena on the top of the head, and Cena's just busted open, man. He's got the proverbial crimson mask, and he's bleeding. But again, this is very, very PG WWE. So it's really adding early on to the match, but they have to get this under control. And to be honest, it's a lot of blood. So they probably got to make sure the guy's okay. Eventually you get the doctors in the ring, and they do the whole thing where they glued his head in the moment and the blood stops and on we go. And after that blood spot though, every time Cena would get on offense again, this crowd would get really into it. You feel for the crowd, you feel for the competitors. This is a really long match on two wrestlers that wrestle very, very slow. There's also a double pin spot. There's also a run-in of Kofi Kingston with the steel chair going after the Legacy guys. He chases off the Legacy guys. This is right around the Kofi Kingston, Randy Orton stuff with the big angle at the Garden and then Cody's immediate deep push. This was in the midst of all of that. You also have the part of this match where Randy Orton tries to explode John Cena on the stage. Cena's laying on the stage, and as you can see there, Orton's trying to mess with the pyro, and he's pressing the button, and it's going off around him. Again, a lame spot. Like no one's believing that you're going to light John Cena on fire here. Cena actually does get a fall with a roll-up here, which I think is awesome. It needs to be more respected. Let's start respecting roll-ups. And like all of these matches, towards the end, it really picked up once Cena got on offense. But Orton's time on offense is slow, not melodical. It's no melody in it. It's methodical. But you become bored. Orton doesn't have this type of heat. And let's face it, it's not really a great match type for Cena. When we think of the great Cena matches, we think of the matches where he has a super amount of heat going up against generally a smaller guy. Him and Orton are so similar, they almost offset each other with their style. And both having this slow kind of style with the fire-up spots eventually from Cena really led to, honestly, a bore of a match. Now, I looked at this. I look over here. Wade Keller actually gave this one 4.5 stars. I think this was generally a well-received match. I thought it was awful, though. It was long. It was plotting the no DQ stipulation. I think added to the limitations that these guys had. Not these guys, I don't think, were completely incapable of being entertaining for an hour, but it wasn't in the wrestling style that they were doing. And it ended actually with Orton tapping we're tied for a little bit. John Cena is pretty much in control for the last 10 minutes of that match. And it's okay. That helps it sort of punctuate the match. And I think really does help bring it together. And one of those amazing STS that he's got, kind of around Orton's head. Cena busted him open earlier, and Orton's just giving him a nice little RKO. But you got the tap. Feud is over, and we can get on with our lives. Whew, that was something. That was 4 matches, 4 months in a row on pay-per-view. And outside of the big Iron Man match, I don't think you can say anyone really had like a satisfying finish or anything you were really looking forward to. And the Iron Man match was a lot to get through, and I think can be a fairly polarizing match. It is this year, it is this time period that we are talking about right here that I was just talking about that created the entirety of the narrative of the Cena versus Orton really sucks. Because for the most part, it kind of did in 2009. They met 4 times on pay-per-view, and only one time I think you could say was probably a good match, and it was an hour-long match where they were blowing each other up. Again, compare that to the rest of the roster, compare that to what's going on in ROH at the time, and this feels like a very lame product, headlined by 2 guys that seem like the most cookie-cutter wrestlers you could think of. Now, I no longer have those opinions of both of these guys. I've actually grown to appreciate both of these guys. But as someone who was in their early 20s at the time and hated all things John Cena, and even though I pretty much only watched WWE, I just had such disdain for the product. This felt like a very, very boring feud and a very, very boring version of WWE. Everything felt lame here. Again, we're only 1 year into the PG era, so that was still a bit of a shocker. It was a bit of a new thing, and it still had a weird like stench to it at this time frame. And again, you have a bad taste at WrestleMania, and the product doesn't really ever feel hot again in 2009 after WrestleMania. It feels like everything just stays at a bit of a water level. Pop quiz though. Who did Cena eventually lose this title to? I don't know if any of you guys can get that. It's almost as obscure as it could possibly be. He did lose this title. But I should note though, this match did end that insane Cena run. Did end that insane Orton run. And I mean that literally, where he was like insane. This kind of starts leading to the breakup of Legacy. And if you recall, by the time we get to WrestleMania, it is a Legacy triple threat with a fully face Randy Orton. And Randy Orton stays face for a really, really long time. He actually doesn't go heel again, if my recollection is correct, until the year of the next match we're going to talk about. But that was the end of the main timeline of the Cena-Orton feud in the 2000s. And again, this is all over a decade ago when they had the majority of their feud. For all of their tons of interactions with each other, the majority of their pay-per-view feud took place over a decade ago. Like, skipped an entire thing. Back in the 2000s. Back when I was cool. That's when this stuff was going on. So we fast forward about 4 years, and the landscape of WWE is completely different in 2013. In 2013, I have a graphic incorrect there. Oh, let me see. Oh, well, now that we are merged and so professional, your boy is skipping a graphic. I have the right title there, but I don't know what I was doing. I was tired while I was making this. Send a super chat, folks, so I don't have to stay up all night, grinding out the salt mine and getting my graphics confused. Let me set the stage here, though. I got this. This is easy, recent wrestling lore. TLC 2013, I think, is most known for the Raw that led up to it. And if you recall what I'm talking about, it's the Championship Ascension, because you had a TLC match at TLC 2013 for the undisputed champion. The whole idea now where we have the belt that Cena currently holds as being the main belt really originates from this time period when they merged the titles to once again create an undisputed champion. Now they for context, they'd had 2 titles for about 11 years, ever since about SummerSlam 2002. You are right, Jose. Sheamus took the belt off him in a tables match. And then I want to say lost the title in an elimination chamber or something to that effect. And had a feud with Triple H. That's how life went. Triple H actually retired him for full-time competition. Weird little side note. Right. TLC 2013, though, what it is probably most known for is the Championship Ascension, where they had both Orton and Cena put their belts on the little pulley and raise it up. They did this recently with a ladder match. I don't remember who it was. And remember, the guys came out on the show on the pay-per-view with the belts. Made no sense. Was that with Cody and KO? I want to say that happened with. Logic, people. How does that work? But this time they did not come out with their belts. I've been dancing around it though, but the championship ascension was kind of where we knew absolutely that Daniel Bryan had to be figured into future plans somehow, some way. It was happening in Seattle, and people got into the segment at the end. The brawl at the end of that was really cool. People kind of forget that, but all people really cared about was Daniel Bryan. Daniel Bryan. Yes, 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 yes. He was so ridiculously over with that Seattle crowd, to the point that several wrestlers had to just acknowledge him during the thing. You guys are raising up his hand. They're trying to get the crowd, they're trying to get the thing under control so Orton and Cena can get on with what they're doing. But that Seattle crowd was not having it at all. But the brawl at the end of that was pretty cool. And then we get to the TLC match, which I gotta say, for all the lack of chemistry that you could complain about earlier, for how boring these guys were, all of that, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but did you know, this is crazy to think, over time, people get better at doing things. True story. Orton and Cena no longer have that negative chemistry when you see them in 2013. Now, they look like completely different people, and also they look exactly the same. They're kind of unchanged, but they're slightly more evolved forms of each other. For one, their relationship with the audience is a little bit different. Cena has a completely different relationship with the audience, and Orton is at the very end of, I think, the total disdain for Orton, the groan-inducing, the blandy Orton. 2011 is when we saw, I think, the personality of Orton start to creep through with his feud with Christian. But it's after all of this, and he starts turning face in the next year, the Seth Rollins feud, where I think we get Orton back reset and sort of entered this legendary phase, which I think really started at SummerSlam 2016. That concussion that Brock gave him just like made him a better wrestler and did all this other, he cut better promos, stuff was more focused, all that happened. Thanks, Brock. But you look at it, these guys, again, they physically look basically the same. They move a lot faster for whatever reason, being a little older. Again, I'm under no illusion to think that they were more athletic than they were in the past. No, that's not the case at all. They were just simply better at what they did. When they were slow and methodical, it was kind of working. They had better timing. They knew how to work these crowds. These crowds, too, were a little bit different. The crowds in 2013 are a little bit more of the refined, smart crowds that you might see frequenting these chats, subscribing to the Torch and the Observer, but they're still there to have fun at these wrestling shows to a point. So the crowd is very much like just kind of into this. And again, they move around well, and these are not two people that you would think would have a decent ladder match. But again, if Rock and Triple H can have a pretty good Iron Man match, and Rock and Triple H can have a pretty good ladder match, what's to say that Cena and Orton can also have a pretty good one? And this was pretty good. It ended with a pretty cool sequence of Cena disassembling the ring, taking off like the entire turnbuckle to land a shot on Orton and him hanging from the ropes. But eventually, in a very slow, methodical way, an unshaven Orton pulls down the title and becomes the undisputed, the WWE World Heavyweight Undisputed Forever Champion until they made another title because of when the brand split. But for that moment, he was the Ultimate Champion. He walks around with those two belts really, really well on that frame that he had in that time. It really looks like that era. And of course, we know what he ended up doing with those belts, or when those belts got into the next hand. But we have to discuss one more thing. And I want to say, too, that ladder match, I got nothing bad to say about it. It wasn't a great match. It wasn't a blow-away match, but it was fine for what it was. For Orton and Cena having a ladder match, probably the best you can ever hope for. And again, it didn't seem like they had that kind of negative chemistry. Fast forward a month, which I've kind of already done on my screen, and I really can't switch it. Royal Rumble 2014. Now, Royal Rumble 2014 is an infamous pay-per-view. Everyone remembers Royal Rumble 14 for the disaster that was the Rumble match. Batista winning, people kind of wanting Roman Reigns of all people to win. And of course, no Daniel Bryan, which led to Rey Mysterio getting mercilessly booed to the point that I've always stood on this. Rey Mysterio had to leave for like those 2 years and then just come back as like the ultimate Rey Mysterio again, just because of this night. This night did so much damage to him. We also remember the card for the great Daniel Bryan Bray Wyatt match that happened on the opener. Probably the best match that Bray Wyatt had, unfortunately, for his entire life. Now that we can make that statement, but a pretty good match all the way around. And we also remembered that CM Punk walked out the next day, so we remember all that. We tend to forget that until Backlash 2025, this was the last one-on-one match between Orton and Cena on a pay-per-view. And so we go into this and we have yet again a storyline of Mr. Cena getting beat up by Randy Orton. We need to heal Mr. Cena and we need face Randy Orton to commit elder abuse. I think Orton has enough, like you guys are talking about. Yeah, the guy beats up his boss and not even in a Stone Cold kind of way and assaults people and everyone just cheers the hell out of the guy. Yeah, that is what it is. So I think now we've come to a point that we need a heel Dad Cena. The crowd is lively here. You have a lot of "Let's go Cena," "Cena sucks" chants, but at this point, this is not the blind hatred of John Cena. This is fun to boo John Cena. It is part of the act. It is all in there. But they're already chanting for Daniel Bryan, and they chant for him several times to the point the commentary has to address, oh, he was in the match earlier. They're chanting for their stuff, but they are chanting for Daniel Bryan. These people are going to be so disappointed. These people have no idea what they're about to cause or what they're about to set off. And you really feel for them because kind of like Philly a year later, this crowd was here to have fun. This crowd, I want to say they were in Pittsburgh, right? Pretty famously. This crowd wanted to enjoy this show. I mean, they wanted to see Daniel Bryan win the Royal Rumble or something other than being faced with a Batista Orton match at WrestleMania. They wanted something other than that. And that's not what they were given on this night. What is great, though, is at one point early on, Orton locks in a headlock, and it doesn't take 5 minutes for it to become boring. As soon as he locks in the headlock, boring, boring, and it just comes out, and they're chanting it. It is great. Speaking of Bray Wyatt, this was actually the Kickstarter of the Cena-Wyatt feud that would end up culminating at WrestleMania, and then they would meet a few years later in the Firefly Funhouse match. This was a few pay-per-views in a row because they met at the Elimination Chamber where Bray Wyatt was just interfering in John Cena's title match. So you had the lights out, you had the interference. Again, they were building to another good match, and it got cut off at the knees. A Royal Rumble is the most appropriate place for kind of a lame finish on a pay-per-view, if we're being honest, because you have a whole lot of other things. Now, on this night, you also had a lame finish to the Royal Rumble. So it was all, I think this match got lost in the shuffle, but also just sort of got compiled with like all the awfulness of that night and of that time period. But hey, whether it was the crowd reaction that night, whether it was CM Punk walking out, whether it was them coming to their senses, we still got a pretty awesome payoff, all things considered, at WrestleMania 30. And that basically concludes the one-on-one pay-per-view matches that Cena and Orton had. So what do we take away from that? Sheamus was the nicest wrestler you ever met. Iron Pit. Interesting. At least Orton and Cena were also nice. So when I look back at these matches, they had so many gimmicks, but they were hampered so much by the PG era that the gimmicks came off corny. And as an extension, the wrestlers came across corny, and the promotion as a whole just came across corny. Like right now, I don't agree with every direction WWE is going in corporate and all that, and some of the things that they're selling and some of the things that they seem to be standing for. But they do seem to at least be sort of a hip company, a whiffing company, a cool company, a company that other people want to attach themselves to. So many other people want to attach themselves to. It almost feels like they didn't trust Orton and Cena to ever have normal matches, which is unfortunate because every time they had a seemingly normal match, or the portions of their matches that were seemingly normal matches without all these gimmicks and all this stalling, they actually had a ton of chemistry together. I don't think there's that notion that these two don't have chemistry. I don't think that's the case. I think the fans were just burnt out on this feud because they had so many screwy finishes. So many matches weren't good because of the way they were booked, and there was an overall negative feeling about these two guys being on top. So when you go through that whole run, like in 2009, going into the 2010s, where you have the Shield coming in, you have the rise of CM Punk, you have Bryan Danielson, you look back at all this, and this seems like some of the worst wrestling ever. Going back and watching it, it wasn't. It was tiring, though. It's exhausting. It's uninteresting. The slow Orton just does not mix with the faux Hogan of Cena. That might have worked in 1985. It did not work in 2009. Again, many of these matches are fine on their own. And on most cases, I think you would say objectively they're good matches. But the feud and the product wasn't there. And the responses to these matches seem like a symptom of that time in WWE. So where does that leave us going forward? Will they have a chemistry? Now, as I mentioned, a few things are different now. The heel and face alignment is different. Something else that's different, though, and I hate to say it, but John Cena appears to be completely washed as a wrestler. And I don't know about you, but as much as I respect Randy Orton and I find him so entertaining on my television so often, I don't exactly think of Orton as the guy to carry another guy to a great and entertaining match. I feel like much like was the reputation with Cena for a while, Orton is obviously a fantastic wrestler, probably better than almost anyone he's ever in the ring with, and he can merge to a lot of other people's styles really well while still keeping that Orton style. So this is going to be a tall task. I assume the crowd is going to be hot as hell. So what are we going to get? Are we going to get a case of guys like Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, how late in their career can have such better matches because they know what they're doing. They have such a good sense of stuff. Or are they going to prove to have the negative chemistry that people thought they had? And more importantly, are they going to book this to just be crone-inducing? We are in a Cena heel era. It's been suggested to me that maybe this is the time when John Cena gets himself intentionally disqualified. I don't know what's going to happen. All I know is this is going to be the end to a long, long, long feud that really wasn't good at any point. So hopefully they can have a nice end to this chapter.